Okay, so the third person we did last week, we did first person. The week before we did brain sharks. But this week we're doing third person point of view. And third person point of view is a narrative technique where the narrator is not a character in the story. So they use third person pronouns to refer to the characters or their names to describe the action in the story. And there are three different kinds of third person point of view. There's third person omniscient, third person limited, and third person objective. And I won't read up some time, but I'll leave that up for now. Well, no, I guess I have to go. Christine, but can we come back to that?
Sure.
Because I want to identify what the stories we're gonna read today are.
Okay.
And I'm hoping to get to that Hal Holbrook video at the end if we have time. So let's jump right in. Alright. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was born in Colombia. But he lived in Europe for a long time, in Spain. And then eventually came back to Colombia. And really revered by that time. I think it was the early 70s that he came back to Colombia after living in Europe. And the political climate at the time was such that he was really revered as like almost a prophet. And in that way, I was telling you beforehand that magical realism was really a technique to talk about political issues and political points in such a way that he could get away with it and just be like, oh, you think I'm talking about like left-wing politics? I'm like, oh, I don't know, it's magic.
Can't get around
Can't get away with that. So, The Anthem Strongman was first published in 1972 in the collection Leaf Storm and Other Stories. And I've read a bunch of his other short stories and they are wonderful. But this one is my favorite. So you're indulging me by reading the story. And
Love that picture. I know.
yeah, that was definitely the most interesting one. So magical realism as it is defined now is first invented, quote unquote, with the short story by Nikolai Gogol called The Nose. Has anyone ever read that? It's weird.
1856.
Not gonna really recommend it, but at the time when it came out, it was mind blowing.
It's still super bizarre.
Yes, when I read that, it was like magical realism. First, I was like, oh, that makes sense. It's very, very odd.
Could you tell when you read it the first time that there was a political
Oh, the nose.
hidden meaning?
I don't know if there's any hidden meaning in those.
There's a certain amount of it because in Russia they have a long history of not being able to write about the people in charge. So they refer to people in charge by some feature. So I think he just took that habit and made a story out of it. Yeah.
Interesting. Handsomest round man in the world. The first children who saw the dark and slinky bulge approaching through the sea let themselves think it was an
Oh.
enemy ship.
The subtitle of the story
Yeah,
is that it is a tale for children.
and I totally don't get that.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay. The first children who saw the dark and slinky bulge approaching through the sea let themselves think it was an enemy ship. Then they saw it had no flags or masts, and they thought it was a whale. But when it washed up on the beach, they removed the clumps of seaweed, the jellyfish tentacles, and the remains of fish and flotsam, and only then did they see it was a drowned man. They had been playing with him all afternoon, burying him in the sand and digging him up again, when someone chanced to see them and spread the alarm in the village. The men who carried him to the nearest house noticed that he weighed more than any dead man they had ever known, almost as much as a horse, and they said to each other that maybe he'd been floating too long and the water had gotten into his bones. When they laid him on the floor, they said he'd been taller than any other men because there was barely enough room for him in the house. But they thought that maybe the ability to keep on growing after death was part of the nature of certain drowned men. He had the smell of the sea about him, and only his shape gave one to suppose that it was the corpse of a human being because the skin was covered with a crust of mud and scales. They did not even have to clean off his face to know that the dead man was a stranger. The village was made up of only 20-odd wooden houses that had stone courtyards with no flowers and which were spread about at the end of a desert. On the end of a desert-like cape. There was so little land that mothers always went about with the fear that the wind would carry off their children, and the few and the few dead that the years had caused among them had to be thrown off the cliffs. But the sea was calm and bountiful, and all the men fitted into 7 boats. So when they found the drowned man, they simply had to look at one another to see that they were all there. That night, they did not go out to work at sea, while the men went to find out if anyone was missing in neighboring villages. The women stayed behind to care for the drowned man. They took the mud off with grass swabs. They removed the underwater stones entangled in his hair, and they scraped the crust off with tools used for scaling fish. As they were doing that, they noticed that the vegetation on him came from faraway oceans and deep water, and that his clothes were in tatters, as if he had sailed through labyrinths of coral. They noticed, too, that he bore his death with pride, for he did not have the lonely look of other drowned men who came out of the sea, or that haggard, needy look of men who drowned in rivers. But only when they finished cleaning him off did they become aware of the kind of man he was, and it left them breathless. Not only was he the tallest, strongest, most virile, and best built man they had ever seen, but even though they were looking at it, there was no room for him in their imagination. There you go. Thanks.
They could not find a bed in the village large enough to lay him on, nor was there a table solid enough to use for his weight. The tallest men's holiday pants would not fit him, nor the fattest one's Sunday shirts, nor the shoes of the one with the biggest feet. Fascinated by his huge size and his beauty, the women then decided to make him some pants, a large piece of sail, and a shirt from some bridal linen, so that he could continue through his death. As they sewed, sitting in a circle and gazing at the corpse between stitches, it seemed to them that the wind had never been so steady, the sea so restless as on that night, and they supposed that the change had something to do with the dead man. They thought that if that magnificent man had lived in the village, his house would have had the widest doors, the highest ceiling, and the strongest floor. His bedstead would have been made from the midship frame held together by iron bolts, and his wife would have been the happiest woman. They thought that he would have had so much authority that he could have drawn fish out of the sea simply by calling their names, and that he would have to put so much work into his land that springs would have burst forth from among the rocks so that he would have been able to plant flowers on the cliffs. They secretly compared him,
I think it's supposed to be him.
him to their own men, thinking that for all their lives, theirs were incapable of doing that. He could do in one night. And they ended up dismissing him deep in their hearts as the weakest, meanest, and most useless creatures on earth. They were wandering through the maze of fantasy when the oldest woman, who was the oldest, had looked upon the drowned man with more compassion, sighed, "He has the face of someone called Esteban." It was true. Most of them had only to take another look at him to see that he could not have any other name. The more stubborn among them, who were the youngest, still lived for a few hours with the illusion that when they put his clothes on and he lay among the flowers, packed leather shoes, his name might be Materia. But it was a vain illusion. There had not been enough canvas, poorly cut and worse-sewn pants were too tight, and the hidden strength of his heart popped the buttons on his shirt. After midnight, the whistling of the wind died down, and the sea fell into its Wednesday drowsiness. The silence put an end to any last doubts. He was Esteban. The women who had dressed him, who had combed his hair, cut his nails, and shaved him, were unable to hold back a shudder of pity. They had to resign themselves to his being dragged along the ground. It was then that they understood how happy he must have been, that huge body, since his father him even after death. They could see him in life, condemned to going through doors sideways, cracking his head on crossbeams, remaining on his feet during visits, not knowing what to do with his soft, pink, sea-lion hands, while the lady of the house looked for her most resistant chair and begged him, frightened to death, to sit there, Esteban, please. And he, leaning against the wall, smiling, "Don't bother, man, I'm fine where I am." His heels raw and his back roasted from having done the same thing so many times whenever he paid a visit. "Don't bother, man, I'm fine where I am," just to avoid the embarrassment of breaking up the chair. And never knowing perhaps that the ones who said, "Don't go," Esteban, at least wait till the coffee's ready, were the ones who later on would whisper the big boot finally left. "Oh, nice. The handsome fool has gone." That was what the women were thinking, beside the body, a little before dawn. Later, when they covered his face with a handkerchief so that the light would not bother him, he looked so forever dead, so defenseless, so much like their men, that the first furrow of tears opened in their hearts. It was one of the younger ones who began weeping. The others, coming to, went from sighs to wails, and the more they saw, the more they felt like weeping, because the drowned man was becoming all the more Esteban for them. So they wept so much, but he was the more destitute, most peaceful, and most obliging man on earth. Poor Esteban. So when the men returned, the news that the drowned man was not from the neighboring villages either. Women felt an opening of jubilation in the midst of their tears. "Praise the Lord," they sighed, "he's ours."
The men thought the fuss was only English frivolity. Fatigue, because of the difficult nighttime inquiries. All they wanted was to get rid of the bother of the newcomer, and once and for all, before the sun grew strong on that arid windless day. They improvised a litter with the remains of foremast and gaffs, tying together with rigging so that it would bear the weight of the body till they reached the cliffs. They wanted to tie the anchor from a cargo ship to him so that he would sink easily into the deepest waves, where fish are blind, divers die of nostalgia, and bad currents would not bring them back to shore, as it happened with other bodies. But the more they hurried, the more the women thought of ways to waste time. They walked about like startled hens, pecking with sea charms on their breasts, some interfering on one side to put a scapular of the good wind on the drowned man, some on the other side to put a wrist compass on him. And after a great deal of get away from there, woman, stay out of the way. Look, you almost made me fall on top of the dead man. The men began to feel distrust in their livers. They started grumbling about why so many main altar decorations for a stranger, because no matter how many nails and holy water jails he had on him, the sharks would chew him all the same. But the women kept piling on their junk relics, running back and forth, stumbling, while they released in sighs what they did not in tears, so that the men finally exploded with since when has there ever been such a fuss over a drifting corpse, a drowned nobody, a piece of cold Wednesday meat? One of the women, mortified by so much lack of care, then removed the handkerchief from the dead man's face, and the men were left breathless too. He was Esteban. It was not necessary to repeat it for them to recognize him. If they had been told Sir Walter Raleigh, even they might have been impressed with his gringo accent, macaw on his shoulder, his cannibal-killing blunderbuss. But there could only be one Esteban in the world, and there he was, stretched out like a sperm whale, shoeless, wearing the pants of an undersized child, and with those stony nails that had to be cut with a knife. They only had to take the handkerchief off his face to see that he was ashamed, that it was not his fault that he was so big, so heavy, so handsome. And if he had known that this was going to happen, he would have looked for a more discreet place to drown in. Seriously, I would have tied the anchor off a galleon around my neck and staggered off a cliff like someone who doesn't like things in order not to be upsetting people now with this Wednesday dead body, as you people say, in order not to be bothering anyone with this filthy piece of cold meat that doesn't have anything to do with me. There was so much truth in his manner that even the most mistrustful men, ones who felt the bitterness of endless nights at sea, fearing that their women would tire of dreaming about them and began to dream of drowned men, even they and others who were harder still shuddered in the marrow of their bones at Esteban's sincerity.
That was how they came to hold the most splendid funeral they could ever conceive of for an abandoned drowned man. Some women who had gone to get flowers in the neighboring villages returned with other women who could not believe what they had been told, and those women went back for more flowers when they saw the dead man. And they brought more and more until there were so many flowers and so many people that it was hard to walk about. At the final moment, it pained them to return him to the waters as an orphan. They chose a father and mother from among the best people, and aunts and uncles and cousins, so that through him all the inhabitants of the village became kinsmen. Some sailors who heard the weeping from a distance went off course. People heard of one who had himself tied to the mainmast, remembering ancient fables about sirens. While they fought for the privilege of carrying him on their shoulders along the steep escarpment by the cliffs, men and women became aware for the first time of the desolation of their streets, the dryness of their courtyards, the narrowness of their dreams as they faced the splendor and beauty of their drowned man. They let him go without an anchor so that he could come back if he wished, and whenever he wished. And they all held their breath for the fraction of centuries the body took to fall into the abyss. They did not need to look at one another to realize that they were no longer all present, that they would never be. But they also knew that everything would be so different from then on, that their houses would have wider doors, higher ceilings, and stronger floors, so that Esteban's memory could go everywhere without bumping into weeds, so that no one in the future would dare whisper, Big Boop finally died, too bad, Handsome Fools finally died, because they were going to paint their houses from gay colors to make Esteban's memory eternal, and they were going to break their backs digging for springs among the stones, planting flowers on the cliffs, so that in future years, at dawn, passengers on freight liners would awaken, suffocated by the smell of gardens on the high seas, and the captain would have to come down from the bridge in his dress uniform, with his astrolabe, his pole star, and his row of war medals, and pointing to the promontory of roses on the horizon, he would say in 14 languages, "Look there, where the wind is so peaceful now that it's gone to sleep beneath the beds. Over there, where the sun's so bright, the sunflowers don't know which way to turn. Yes, over there. That's Esteban's village."
Third person. So, which of the three different guys, which one do you think this story is?
Third person.
I would argue, I would think that it's omniscient.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
because
right.
it's the thoughts and feelings.
Oh, yeah.
Because at one point he's in the heads of the women,
Yeah.
and then the men.
Yeah.
That would be my guess, or maybe not.
And,
Yeah, because it wasn't.
oh, I was just thinking too, the way that Brian was done, it's almost like that on this.
Yeah.
Just thinking of these, there's little periods breaking up the boxes, ramblings of what he's seen, what she's seen.
Sentences are so long, it's hard to read.
It really
Yeah.
is.
Because you can't get
Yeah.
the rhythm because the sentence
The
just
sentence-
keeps going and going.
Yeah,
You make no breaks to whatever it is, you
Yeah.
were taught in
And
periods.
it's, you can break in the wrong place and then you go, that doesn't make any sense.
Right, yeah, we were all catching ourselves doing that, because it's like, wait a minute, that's it.
I think there was part of that translation issue.
yeah, and the Wednesday insult that they keep making,
Yeah.
I don't understand that. That must be a language barrier.
Maybe it's also that old rhyme about Wednesday's child is full of woe.
I've never,
Monday's child is fair of face, Tuesday's child is full of grace, Wednesday's child is full of woe, Thursday's child is far to go, Friday's child is loving and giving, Saturday's child has to work for a living, but the child that's born on the Sabbath day is bonny and blithe and good and gay.
They're
I
loud.
remember all of that, because I knew that at least. Nonsense.
And you wondered, well, that would have been European, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's from, like, Mother Goose, basically.
Yeah.
So it was known, it was among all of Europe. It's not just an American thing.
Makes you wonder if he would have brought it back, if you're, if you brought it back, even in Europe, back to, right.
exactly. I think he may have been this, like, while he was in Spain, right before he left to go back. And this village, I just finished on New Year's of Solitude, and apparently that location, that some Zorns out on the condo called it. And this takes place in the condo. That village was like, what is it, Yarpanawatha County, that Faulkner, where all these stories take place. They're in a fake county in northern Mississippi. And apparently Garth said, like, they're arguing this like which writer kind of came up with that concept first because they grew up together, but separately, kind of like the short story in general. Like they grew up in France and Russia and the United States. It's like a big to do, like a big thing in the mid 19th century. So,
Marquez and Faulkner, good buddies,
no,
Contemporaries.
contemporaries.
So
they were contemporaries, yes. But there's nothing that I've read anyway say like they were, you know, bouncing ideas off each other, or like who came up with the idea of, you know, oh, that's cool. Like setting all my stories in one place. You know, I wonder the narrator doesn't seem to express any of his own opinions. So it might be their first objective too.
It's almost like between the two of them because
Yeah,
the narrator seems to know what they're thinking,
yeah,
but you're right, it doesn't ever,
yeah. He doesn't say
I
like,
don't know what he feels like.
yeah, you know, sends his opinions.
Well, when he says what the people said, it's not in quotation marks, so it's
Yeah.
like, it has been referred to over and over again, so this is like the next line of the tale. So it gives it that feeling that this story has been told enough times that all the details about who thought what and who said what have become just in the flow of the story. And
But
so,
passed down orally.
yeah, so it's become objective, where, you know, if it were happening right now, it would be omniscient because he's reading people's minds, but because of the way he tells it, I think it might be objective because of that. He's referring to it.
Speaking
That makes
of
a lot
Mother,
of sense, what you just said,
speaking of Mother Goose, what do you make of the subtitle of the story? It's not listed here,
What
but
was it again?
a tale for children.
yeah. Baffling?
I mean, there's children in it.
Yeah.
I would read it to children. I think it's a wonderful story for children because they love that horrible gory stuff. I mean, you know, like the kids at the start burying him and digging him up over and over again.
Oh, well, that part too, like the women are lusting after him and he's dead and they think their husbands are horrible now.
Yeah.
This guy's so amazing, so I don't, that part kind of makes me not want to read it to kids, but I don't know that they would pick up on that.
Is it like a joke or something?
I don't know. But I think you're right that there is some maybe it's a lost in translation thing,
Right.
but I don't know. I think it's interesting. And that's it.
You know, it's like telling the emotional history of the town rather than the history of the
And
town.
how they changed themselves,
Yeah.
became more flamboyant in a way.
Yeah.
Just not so gray and boring.
I looked up while we were reading it what Esteban means.
That's what I,
It means either crown or garland. So they're basically saying he's like the king. He's like the king returns.
See, to me, I just kept thinking, he's Stephen? Who cares? That's such an ordinary name, what's the deal? So that makes more sense because, yeah, they were treating him like royalty.
Yeah, and so, you know, being a town where everybody is related to the king makes everybody royal in a sense. And so, you know, that like lifts them all up. And so telling the kids the story of how you became royalty is, you know, that's kind of, you know, fairy tale sort of story.
Well, 100 Years of Solitude, I realize I literally just got there, but this is,
Like,
Oh, you get-
let me
you
use
just-
my college degree. I never get to do this, I promise.
just finished it as well.
Yeah, so it's a very similar, like, it's the same family
It's set
through,
up condo, both stories.
Okay.
yeah, it's like it's a family that goes through generations. It's very much about the similar theme, plus the whole like realismo mágico thing that Marquez sort of created. The Spanish literacy is finally coming.
I'm lost, yeah.
Well, it's like the
Magical
it's,
realism.
yeah, magical realism is the same thing. Yeah, it's so there's I wouldn't call it tongue in cheek, but there's this like acknowledgement of the absurd. Maybe a decent way to put it.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It makes you believe it. I mean, like, as you're going through the story, it's just ridiculous that they're scraping all this stuff off it, but it works.
I really like the sentiment at the very end that, oh, we need to like bring an engineer our whole town down to accompany this guy. I wanna see that done about accessibility in general.
Just
They changed from let it sink all the way to the bottom. First they floated up, let it sink all the way to the bottom, and then they changed it, this kind of brings kinship, they're talking about it.
right.
We need him to be able to come back whenever.
Yeah.
We need him to revisit us, so. Not have, they're just waiting in.
Change their town in preparation for his next visit.
I was a little off, well, I'm not off, but it's not the right phrase. But the people in the town don't make the mental leap that maybe he comes from like a town of other huge people.
Right.
It's like, oh, yeah. Never make that jump.
So I was desperately struggling to try to figure out what this story represented or
Yeah.
what it meant. Maybe you're gonna like me, because I couldn't figure it out. The only thing I could stretch my brain to like pretend was maybe this was some sort of story, sort of like Christ coming, they treated Christ so poorly at the beginning, and they wanted to get rid of him, but then they honored him and they wanted to come back.
I think
I have no idea whether that's even remotely true, but that's the only thing I could possibly come up with. So enlighten me if I.
Well, I was trying to do that. You were saying that it's kind of an allegory that tells the story of the people in the town. More than it does the drowned man. Because the drowned, obviously they have no idea where he came from, but they're telling the drowned man is not the story though. The story is, so I'm not sure.
I think you're probably right with a certain degree of Christ coming back. With the name that's named after Crown,
Right.
Crown of Thorns, and all that.
So you talked about magical realism being telling a story to hide some political
Yeah.
truth. Is that here too?
That's what I asked.
I don't know. Maybe there's something to be said about receiving like an other, a complete other, accepting that, and like changing their lives after meeting another.
It was very different from that.
So maybe that could be the lesson here.
Yeah, like accepting another culture.
Yeah.
Or is it coming to value your own culture?
Ah, Yeah, because like
Right, 'cause
Dan
they-
said, it's all about the townspeople.
Right, all of a sudden they hated their own men, and they
Right.
hated the fact that we were short and then low doors, but then they sort of came around.
I was also wondering, are these, is
Was
this?
that?
Oh, I was just trying to remember where Marquez was from.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
I was
where,
wondering if everybody was really small in the village.
Yeah.
Are they just exceptionally small and he's a normal sized man?
But then they said he felt like the weight of a horse.
Right.
So, he must be giant.
Well, because the water was in his bones.
What kind of force?
well, duh.
For real, we're gonna get into it.
Well, and I had nothing that was bugging me throughout the whole thing. This guy was floating in the water. He would be so gross and putrefied
Oh,
and chewed
yeah.
up and he wouldn't be handsome. So that's where like that magical part comes in because they're so involved.
He's great at all odds.
Yeah.
It's pretty long, they're trying to get to the heart of these. I love it was that, they're going, hey, we counted ourselves.
We're all
You know what's missing, okay?
Must be a stranger.
Yeah, then the women, okay, we'll dress him. It looks like, and then their imagination must have come into play because he had to be terrible looking. and all that
Right.
stuff on him. So they had to imagine him. What did that fit like?
Or if he was a magical creature, then he didn't smell bad or look bad.
We had that nice candy shell that it was protecting.
I was curious, I was like, what makes you look at a drowned man and say this is the most virile man I've ever seen?
Right.
That was a very deliberate choice of words, yeah.
Right.
What is that?
Is it just, yeah.
Where are we coming from?
Well, he was probably naked when they were dressing himself.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where all the comparison came.
I love the,
He had hands like a sea lion.
oh no, there's one line like, the women all loved him, and, no, like, his woman must have been like,
And the happiest place.
yeah, where is that line?
It's in the middle, you like it's on the side.
Yeah.
But it was interesting, the same one with the women, the young women was wanting to start having a little different idea, but they were quickly, no, it can't be what was the name that they thought it could have been.
Tour.
Oh, the tour guide.
Yeah, it's like, the Fame Illusion guys, come on.
You
that's
like
not
that
what-
That's what it was. Eh,
I'm trying to find that line.
There's.
Yeah, fascinated by his huge size. I think there's some connotations in there.
That was the name of a Native American ruler who led the indigenous resistance against Spanish conquest in Chile.
Huh?
Say that again? He was the,
It was the head of the indigenous resistance against the Spanish in Chile.
Tyler, maybe you know a little more about it. First thing we're gonna he wrote this while he was still in Spain. But they came back in the early 70s. I think this was written, published in 72. And then 74, he came back to Colombia and everybody there loved him. He was kind of their Hemingway. You know, he was like a big celebrity.
Well, as far as I can remember, could be mistaken, historically speaking, Colombia didn't really have that, like, it wasn't like Chile or the other countries that got overthrown by whoever it was, you know, it was the CIA, but it was the CIA. We know this now, you can literally Google it, but Colombia didn't have like a full-on overthrow, they had more of a push and pull. Part of that's politically, a lot of the power is taken by cartels and criminal organizations, so they weren't a party, you know, it wasn't Salvador Allende getting taken out by the generals kind of thing. So in terms of like why, there's more to it, for sure, but Marquez wasn't in like political exile. He just left. Especially at that time in the 70s, you're going to be in the Spanish-speaking literary world in Spain, obviously. I think that's all I got, unless you just want me to conjecture which happened. But yeah, more or less, I don't think, he wasn't like fleeing persecution. I don't think.
No, I
think
don't
it was
think that's why it was,
more like an academic, yeah.
I think so.
It was just where the universities were. Yeah, and again, if you were going to be in Spanish language literature,
Yeah,
Spain, obviously. Which is a corner of the Colombia.
You're talking about his house, highest ceiling, strongest floor. His bedstead would have been made from a midship frame held together by iron bolts, and his wife would have been the happiest woman.
yeah,
In the
that's
same line with the bed, so.
yeah. All right.
Well, they also have one bit of political stuff going on. Okay, they got the young women say, oh, he's like the ruler of the indigenous people. And they say, no, that's not it. And they also say if they had been told that he was Sir Walter Raleigh, they might have been impressed, but, they know that that's not so. So it's not the whites, it's not the indigenous people, it's our people in between. So it's kind of making a statement about the people descended from the Spanish in that area, and how, they have their own people too. So that might be one of the reasons why he was so revered. He was given voice to people that, the whites and the Europeans, they had their stories,
Yeah,
and the indigenous people had their stories, but there wasn't anything for the people in between. And so this is kind of same.
all right.
Those are the mestizo mixture, because the Spanish
Yeah.
colonial empire had essentially like a pigmentocracy. So there was like
Yeah.
two basically white presenting people from Spain that moved to the New World. They were top of the pyramid, you know what I mean? And then it was like, if you're Spanish, but you were born in the New World, tear down, you know what I mean? And then it basically just went, literally pigmentocracy. It's just basically how white you were, or, well, how tied you were to the imperial center. So again, if it was two Spanish people who moved there, top, tip of the spear, top of the pyramid, and then it went from there. So it's like if you were Spanish, even if you're both white presenting Spanish people, you were born there, you were a bit of a tier down. And then once you got into, interracial relationships, it tiered down from there. If you Google pigmentocracy, there's like hasn't aged terribly well, obviously, but there's an illustration from back then that like spells out basically the hierarchy.
It was that way in America for a long time. Slave.
Yeah, it's very similar. Like, the idea of like you're white or you're black, or this is a mulatto, or you're a free. It's the same thing, just with different names, really.
Those terrible names.
Yeah, just a bunch of terms that no one should probably say.
What else on the point? All right. Jump into Jai, we discovered. I came here pronouncing it terribly wrong, and I was correct. Jai Ishak.
Oh, I forget. I don't pass mine at the beginning, so nobody will get distracted reading it when we're supposed to be doing it. Mostly because I would do that in school. Oh, okay.
Chuck Murray was born in Kolkata, India. And this story, I haven't read any, well, I've read a couple of their short stories by him. But I haven't read either most recent book called Play for the End of the World. I hope to get to it. But this story of his, it kind of launched his career. And when it came out, it won a postcard. O. Henry Bryce and what was included in the Best American Fiction. which is amazing. It's kind of like Triple Crown. There only happens once in a while. And he got his MFA from Brooklyn College, and right now he's lecturing in Stanford, I think. But don't quote me on that. Suzanne, can you read that quote, that big book? This is from him about short stories.
With the short story, we can enter into a world and can have a complete experience in a single sitting. What a gift that is, and one I think is even more desirable with increasing distractions and shortened attention spans. Like a poem, the short story also forces me to read slowly. If I miss a single line in a short story, I might miss something of great import, whereas novels often have ways of reinforcing or even repeating the important things. This is all to say that I know very little about publishing trends, but for me, the short story will remain an enduring and essential form.
So, in that way, short stories are really kind of emblematic of our time right now because of reduced attention spans. I remember I tried to teach this story when I first came out. Even it was like too long for my students to really, they were young. I was teaching college at the time. And even they were like too easily distracted. They had to like keep their attention by playing videos and church. It was really, really kind of not a great experience teaching children. Because I had to be like on my A game every day, you know, like basically doing my best to keep their attention. I think it was 2013 was the shooting at Virginia Tech. Was that right? Yeah.
Somewhere.
But before that, my students had to like relinquish their phones. So they couldn't be on their phone in the classroom. But because of that school shooting, students were supposed to be allowed to keep their phones because then they could like alert the campus of what was happening. So I don't know what the answer is there, whether or not you should or should not. All right.
It makes me think of the way you, at reading it, you different of TV shows. You know,
Yeah.
but we can't end the TV show. A TV show is more like the novel, it's gonna keep going. It's gonna come into the next show. They're gonna leave you on.
Yeah.
So, what I like the idea of the short story, you read it, and that's it. Then.
Yeah.
But now you deal with the story as a whole as opposed to a chapter that, okay, I got it, I see how it's the bigger one. This is a shorter one.
I especially like when he said, if I miss a single line in a short story, I might miss something of great import. And that's so true, because in a novel, if you miss something, it's gonna come back around, or you're gonna get a clue somewhere else to
Yeah.
fill in that empty space. But in a short story, you're like, wait, I have to go back because it could really change the whole meaning of it.
All right, let's jump in.
All right.
Uh,
I'll give us a picture.
Yeah, he's a young guy, he's still writing.
A small sacrifice for an enormous happiness by High Acrobatic. From his balcony, Mikhail waited and watched the street as hyacinth braiders tied floral knots, rum sellers hauled bags of ice, and the row of elderly typists, who'd seemed elderly to him since he'd been a boy, struck the last notes of their daily work. Beside him on the balcony, his servant Kanu picked at the hair that grew from his ears. "Keep a lookout for Babu," Nikhil shouted to Kanu. "I'll check on the tea." Kanu was so old he could neither see nor hear well, but he still accepted each responsibility with enthusiasm. The tea was ready, as were the sweets, the whole conical pile of them, the base layer of pistachio mounds, the center almond bars that Nikhil had rolled by hand himself, and on the top 3 lychees from the garden, so precariously balanced, a single misstep would have upset their delicate geometry. When he returned to the balcony, he saw Sharma walking up the cobbled lane, his oiled hair shining in the late afternoon light. The typist greeted him with a verse from a Bollywood number. Sharma's boxer's jaw and darling eyes reminded the typists of an emerging movie star, and Sharma shook his head and laughed. Kanu limped downstairs to let Sharma in, and Nikhil waited in the living room while the two of them made their way up. "And what is the special occasion?" Sharma said, eyeing the pile of confections with a boyish grin. Nikhil refused to say. He allowed Sharma to have his fill, watching with satisfaction as his fingers became honey-glazed from the offering. Afterward, when they lay on the great divan, hand-carved and older than his mother's ghost, Nikhil breathed deeply to calm his heart. He feared the words would be eaten in his chest, but he'd been planning to tell Sharma for days, and there was no going back now. As evening settled, the air between them became heavy with the sweetness of secrecy, but secrecy had a short wick. "My dearest, fairest boy," he said, "I want our love to increase." Sharma raised his eyebrows, those lines thickly drawn, nearly fused. Who better than Sharma to know Nikhil's heart? Who but Sharma to take it all in stride? "I desire to have a child with you," Nikhil said. Nikhil had trouble reading Sharma's expression in the waning light, so he repeated himself. His fingers were shaking, but he took Sharma's hand anyway, gave it a squeeze. "I heard you the first time," Sharma said. A rare, cool wind had prompted Nikhil to turn off the ceiling fan, and now he could hear the rum sellers on the street enunciating prices in sing-song Urdu. He touched Sharma's face, traced the line of his jaw, unsure still of how his lover had received his news. Likely, Sharma was still mulling. He formed his opinions, Nikhil believed, at the pace the street cows strolled. Nikhil waited out the silence as long as he could. "Listen," he finally said, "the country is changing." "A child diapered by 2 men," said Sharma. "Your country is changing faster than my country is changing. What about the boys from Kerala?" They had learned about a school teacher and a postal clerk who'd secretly made a life together. Unfashionably attired and chubby cheeked, they seemed too dull for the news. A few months ago, locals threw acid on their faces. Even in the black and white of the photographs, their scars along the jaw, the nose, the better half of the cheek. 10 years since man had landed on the moon, and still. "We are not boys from Kerala. We are protected." No ruse better than a woman in the home, Nikhil had argued over a year ago, and eventually Sharma had agreed to a marriage of convenience. Kanu, who had loved Nikhil through his childhood and even through his years of chasing prostitutes, had arranged for a village woman who knew about the men's relationship, but would never tell. Nikhil rummaged through his almirah and returned with a gift in his hands. "You close your eyes now." "Nikhil." But Sharma closed his eyes, accustomed now, perhaps, to receiving precious things. Around Sharma's neck, Nikhil tied his dead mother's necklace. It had been dipped in 24 carats of gold by master artisans of Agra. Miniature busts of Queen Victoria decorated its circumference. A piece for the museums, a jeweler had once explained, but Nikhil wanted Sharma to have it. That morning, when he visited the family vault to retrieve it, he startled himself at the enormity of what he was giving away. But what better time than now, as they were about to begin a family? Promise you'll dream about a child with me. It is beautiful, and I will wear it every day, even though people will wonder what it is under my shirt. Let them wonder. You are entirely mad. Mad is what you are. Nikhil was pulled back to the divan. Sharma, lifting Nikhil's shirt, placed a molasses square on his belly, teasing a trail of sweetness with his tongue. Nikhil closed his eyes and allowed himself to be enjoyed. Down below, the rum sellers negotiated, the prices of bottles fluctuating wildly. Afterward, they retired to the roof. Their chadors cut off the cold, but Nikhil still shivered. When Sharma asked what the matter was, Nikhil kissed the spot where his eyebrows met. There was another old roof across the street where grandmothers were known to gossip and eavesdrop, but he did not care. Let them hear, he thought. Let them feel this wind of enormous change. The next morning, while Sharma washed, Nikhil said, I want you to toss the idea to your wife. Get Tripti used to the matter. Sharma dried himself so quickly he left behind footprints on the bathroom's marble floor. Toss the idea to my wife. Get her used to the matter, Sharma said, before he changed into his working clothes, leaving Nikhil to brood alone. Tripti would have few issues with the arrangement of a child, Nikhil believed. After all, at the time of her marriage to Sharma, her family was mired in bankruptcy. Her father had left them nothing but a reputation for drink and dishonesty, and she herself, insofar as he recalled from his soul meeting with her at the wedding, was a dour, spiritless creature who deserved little of the bounty that had been provided her. What else he knew was from Kanu's reports. Extremely pliable, Kanu had first said. Then closer to the wedding, a little stubborn about the choice of sweets. She wants village kind. On that note, Nikhil had wilted. Let her have her desserts, he'd said, for the wedding paid for, and the matter removed from his mind. The next few days, when Sharma was away at the village and at the foundry, Nikhil paced around the house, overcome by the idea of a child. He'd always dreamed of becoming a father, but had never believed it would be his due until this year's monsoon, when, in the middle of a deluge, his 42-year-old sister had given birth to a girl. The rain had been so fierce no ambulance could ferry them to the hospital, so the elderly women of the family assumed the duties of midwifery and delivered the child themselves. The first moment he saw his niece, he nearly believed in God, and strangely, in his own ability, his right to produce so perfect a thing. He couldn't bring Sharma to his sister's house to meet his new niece, so the next week he'd spent their Thursday together sharing photos. If Sharma experienced the same lightness of being, he didn't let it show. All Sharma said was, quite a healthy baby she is. It was true. She had been born 9 pounds and 2 ounces. The family had purchased a cow so that fresh milk would always be available. Nikhil convinced himself that Sharma had opened his heart to the idea of fathering, but the exuberance of this conclusion led to a certain practical questions. Sharma's wife would be the carrier of the child, but where would the child live? In Sharma's house in the village, or in Nikhil's house here in the city? If she lived in the village, which Nikhil admitted was the safer option, how would Nikhil father her? How would she receive a proper education? These questions consumed the hours. When he went to check on his tenants, he was distracted and unable to focus on their concerns. A leaky toilet, a broken window, the group of vagrants who squatted outside one of his properties. All these matters seemed trivial compared to his imagined child's needs. The next week, the afternoon before he would see Sharma again, he stepped into a clothing store on Rashbahari Avenue to calm his mind. It was a shop he frequented to purchase silk kurtas for Sharma or paisley shirts for himself. He told the attendants he needed an exceptional outfit for his niece. They combed the shelves and found a white dress with a lacy pink bow. He imagined his daughter wearing it. From his dreaming, he was certain a girl would come out of their love. Shristi is what he'd named her. Shristi enunciating like a princess. Shristi riding her bicycle up and down Kapuulia Lane. Early on, they'd agreed Nikhil would avoid the foundry, but he was feeling so full of promise for Shristi that he did not deter himself from continuing down Rashbahari Avenue toward Tali Gunjipari, nor did he prevent himself from walking to the entrance of Mahesh Steel and asking for his friend. Sharma emerged from the uneven music of metalworking with a cigarette between his lips. His Apollonian features were smeared with grease, his hands constricted by thick welding gloves, which excluded the possibility of even an accidental touch. When he saw Nikhil, Sharma scowled. "Sir," he said, "you'll have the parts tomorrow." Though he knew Sharma was treating him as a customer for good reason, the tone still stung. Nikhil whispered, "See what I have brought." He produced the perfect baby girl dress. "You have lost your suit," Sharma whispered back. And so everyone could hear, "Babu, you'll have the parts tomorrow. Latest, tomorrow." Nikhil tried again. "Do you see the collar, the sweet lace?" "You should go to your home now," Sharma said. "Tomorrow, I'll see you." But that Thursday, Sharma failed to visit. Nikhil and Kanu waited until 9:30 and then ate their meal together by lamplight. Somebody else want to take a turn?
Sure. You should, wait. Thursdays, because it was on a Thursday, they had met 3 years ago. That time of year when the city is at its most bearable, when the smell of wild hyacinth cannot be outdone by the stench of the gutters, because it is after the city's short winter, which manages, despite its brevity, to birth more funerals than any other time of year. In the city's spring, 2 men walking the long road from Santiniketan back to Kolkata, because the bus has broken and no one was interested in its repair, are not entirely oblivious to the smells abounding in the wildflower field, not oblivious at all to their own smells. He supposed he had fetishized Sharma's smell from the beginning, that scent of a day's honest work, the smell of steel, of the cheapest soap, the smell of a shirt that had been laundered beyond its time, the smell of his night-bound stubble. He allowed his hand to linger on Sharma's wrist, pretending he was trying to see the hour. An hour before sunset, an hour after. He did not remember exactly when they parted. What did it matter? What mattered were the coincidences of love. The day he saw Sharma for the second time, he counted among the smallest miracles of his life. Sharma was drinking tea at the tea stall on Kakulia Lane. He was leaning the weight of his body on the rotting wood of the counter, listening to the chaiwala recount stories. Later, he would learn that Sharma had landed a job at a nearby foundry, and that this tea stall was simply the closest one. But in that moment, he did not think of foundries or work or any other encumbrance. He thought instead of the way Sharma cradled his earthen teacup as if it were the Koh-i-Noor. "Oh," he had said, "did you and I, that broken bus, what an evening, yes?" A question that led to Thursdays. 2 years of Thursdays haunted by fear of discovery, which led to a wedding because a married man who arrived regularly at Kakulia Lane could not be doing anything but playing backgammon with his happenstance friend. What followed was a year of bliss. He considered this time their honeymoon. They were as seriously committed as any partners who'd ever shared a covenant, and shouldn't that show? Sharma did visit the following Thursday, though the matter of his absence the week before was not raised. Instead of their usual feast at home, they ate chili noodles doused with sugary tomato sauce at Jimmy's Chinese kitchen, along with stale pastries for dessert. Sharma was wearing Nikhil's family necklace under his shirt with just an edge of the Queen's image peeking out from the collar. Seeing his gift on his lover's body released Nikhil from his brood, and for the first time that night, he met Sharma's gaze. "You're cross with me," Sharma offered. It wasn't an apology, but Nikhil was warming to the idea of a recollection. Reconciliation thing. Makes a whole lot more sense. Anyway, Tripti and I have been discussing the issue of the baby. Tripti and I. He so rarely heard the name Tripti from Sharma's lips, but that she could be in league with him discussing an issue? Unjust was what it was. It's in part the physical act. We eat our meals together. We take walks to the bazaar or the pond. But no, we do not do that. Don't worry, Nikhil said. I shall do the deed. I shall be the child's father. While it was unpleasant to imagine the act of copulation itself, he'd studied the intricacies of the reproductive process and believed his chances were excellent for a single, well-timed session to yield its fruit. But you could barely stand the smell of a woman. What passed over Sharma's face may have been described as amusement, but Nikhil refused to believe his lover wasn't taking him seriously. Not now that he'd opened his heart like a salvaged piano. Sharma, Nikhil said, it shall be a small sacrifice or an enormous happiness. Oh, Nikhil, do you not see that we are already happy? Anything more might upset what we have. We should not tempt the gods. Would you like to take over? It's definitely not my day.
Nikhil ground blade of the pastry in his mouth, till the memory of sweetness dispersed. The things Sharma said, as if there were a cap on happiness in this world. In the strongest village, religion talking in. But there was something more. He sensed in the way Sharma held his hands in his lap, the way he kept to the far side of the bed when they retired for the night. That Tripti had warmed something rotten into him. He was vulnerable that age. Nikhil woke the next morning. Sharma had already departed, but in the bathroom, which he lovingly reconstructed from Parisian prints, the clawfoot tub and nearly functioning by the end of the day, he found Sharma's stubble littering the marble sink. Sharma had always been fastidious in the house, taking care to wipe away evidence of his coming and going. The patches of facial hair offended Nikhil. He studied their formation, searching for patterns. When nothing could be discerned, he called for a canoe to leave the room. Only one train went to Middlesbrough, a commuter local. For 2 hours, Nikhil was stuck next to the village yeoman, gone to the city to peddle his chickens, and was clutching the feet of the aging pair who'd been unable to sell. And the bleary-eyed dairyman smelled of curd and urine. The only distraction was the girl with her penitent hair, who boarded between stops to plead for money. Her face looked entirely too much like the child he envisioned father. When he reached the Middlesbrough terminus, he was relieved to see the rows of wildflowers on the higher side of the tracks, to smell the linden begonias planted by the station master's post. It wasn't difficult finding Sharma's home. With money from the factory and regular mixed cash from the field, Sharma had purchased several hectares of hilltop land and built a concrete slab of a house, garrisoned with a garden of squash, cucumber, and eggplant, with large windows marked with combined living and dining area. Gil found the structure too modern, but that was Sharma's way. He never swooned over the old colonials of Victoria inside the house, he overheard the broadcast. Strange, Tripty didn't understand English. He tiptoed toward the open living room window, and from there he spied Shaman's wife, who was holding a book on her lap, mouthing back words of the BBC announcer. Berlin Wall, she said, Downing Street. She had a proud, bookish nose, adequately sized for the resting of eyeglasses, a forehead that jutted too far forward, reminding Nikhil of a depiction of a Neanderthal Gethers, and the slightest of chins, which gave to her appearance a quality of perpetual neatness. Her sari was stained with years of cooking. Her only adornments were the bright red bindi on her forehead and the brass bangles that made music whenever she turned the page. There were certain topics Nikhil and Sharma had left to the wind, foremost the matter of Sharma's marriage. In the beginning, Nikhil experienced a shooting pain in his abdomen. Whenever he thought about Sharma and Tripti coexisting in domestic harmony, though over the past few months that pain had numbed, the less he thought of Tripti, the less she existed. But here she was now, the would-be mother of his child. He rapped on the grill of her window. Just
leave it there, Tripty said without looking up from her book. It was the first time she'd ever spoken to him. Her voice, which was composed of rich baritones, seemed rather forceful, and her demeanor, that of the lady of a proper house, left him feeling uncertain about his next move. At last, he said in Bengali so refined that it could have passed for an old tongue of Sanskrit, "Perhaps you've mistaken me for the bringer of milk. I am not he. Madam, you know me, but you do not know me." The words had sounded elegant in his head, but when spoken aloud, he flushed into foolishness. He looked up to study his face, then his outfit, even his shoes now rimmed with villagers' mud. "I know who you are," she finally said. "Why don't you come inside?" He had not planned beyond this moment. He had allowed his feet to step onto the train in Howrah, imagined a brief meeting, a quick exchange at the doorstep, ending with a mutually desirable pact. "I can't stay long," he said. Sharma would be home in another hour, and Nikhil had no wish to see Sharma in the same vicinity with his wife, Pheasant's wife. Well, he settled into the living room. Tripti puttered around the kitchen. The house was decorated with wood carvings and paintings of gods and goddesses. Parvati, the wife of Shiva, smiled beatifically from a gilded frame. And her son, the remover of obstacles, was frozen inside a copper statuette. From the plans Sharma had gloated over, he knew a hallway connected the 3 bedrooms of the house, one for Tripti, one for Sharma, and the last, a prayer room. He wondered now who slept there, slept where, how their mornings were arranged, and what politics were discussed, what arguments were had, where the laundry was washed. Tripti brought 2 cups of tea and a plate of sweets. "Homemade," she said. He'd been raised to fear milk sweets from unfamiliar places, but out of politeness, he took the first bite, a little lumpy, only mildly flavorful. "Sharma is always praising your cooking," he said, but it was a lie. They never bothered to discuss Tripti's cooking. In fact, Nikhil had teased that they were lovers because of his talents in the kitchen. Still, it felt appropriate to compliment this woman. And he continued in this fashion, standing to admire the Parvati painting, which he described as terribly and wonderfully artful. "Nikhil Babu," she interrupted, "are you here to discuss the matter of the child?" He sighed. Till that moment, he'd been unsure about how to broach the subject. "You know," she said, "we discuss our days. We may not be lovers, but we are fair friends. He experienced what felt like an arthritic pain in his shoulder, but it was only the cover of his jealousy. At least they were not best friends. She pointed to the book on her coffee table, an English language primer. Unfortunately, it's just not on our horizon. You see, I'm going to university. I shall be a teacher. University? He said. But you did not even finish 8th grade. That is true, but at Billispark College, the principal is willing to accept students who display enormous curiosity. He found it improbable that she would be able to absorb the principles of higher learning, but he had no particular wish to impede her efforts. Education was a challenge, he understood. You want to improve yourself? Wonderful. If you are with child, I will have tutors come to you, not professors from Billispark College, real academics in the city. But it was as if she had not heard him at all. She submerged a biscuit in her tea and stared out to the garden. Whose happiness are you after, Kyoto? She said. Yours? Yours only? He found himself grinding his teeth, a great bane of modernity. Though the country had opened itself to the pleasures of the world, cream-filled pastries, the films of Goddard, a penchant for pristine white sand beaches, he did not care for consequences. Dissolution of order and traditions, with whose loss came horse peace, thoughtless conduct. A village woman addressing him without the slightest deference. Perhaps you should enroll in a school for proper manners, he said. Trippy, he eased her chin cup down. He followed the geometry of her sloping wrist, but there was no break of anger in her face. Listen, he said, but how could he explain that his want for a child had become rooted in his body? The bones of his hands and the ridge of his knee were just that afternoon the girl on the train who had emerged from the rice fields to beg in the vestibules, his outstretched palm he would normally loathe. There was no way to lift the country by satisfying beggars had touched him. Had he not smiled back and touched her hair?
If you're planning to catch the last train back, she said, it's best you go now. He chewed another of Trixie's lumpy sweets. When properly masticated, it would have the consistency to be spat and to land right between Trixie's eyes. But Trixie had turned away from him and resumed her studies. Soon he was all chewed out. He had to shut himself out of the house. By the time he reached the train station, 6 o'clock was arriving at the platform. He squatted behind the begonias by the station master's post and waited to see if Sharma was aboard. To the afternoon's disappointment, he felt he deserved to see Sharma's face, even if only covertly. See but remain unseen. In that moment, he could not have explained why he did not put his head out of a tangle of flowers, though a glimmer of an idea came. Something to do with the freedom of others. How in this village of Sharma's birth, unknown and burdened, Nikhil could never be himself. Sweat cooled where his hairline had receded. How old the skin of his forehead felt untouched. As passengers began to disembark, those who were headed for the city clambered aboard. He looked at the faces passing, but did not see them. First 20 bells sounded, then the second, and the station master announced the train was nearly city-bound. He saw Sharma as the crowd was thinning out. He was walking with someone dressed in the atrocious nylon pants that were in the fashion, and perhaps they were telling jokes because Sharma was doubled over laughing. In all their evenings together, he couldn't recall seeing Sharma laugh with so little inhibition as now, so little concern about who would hear that joyous voice, who would think, what are those two doing? He watched Sharma walk along the dirt road toward his house. It was an entirely different progress. He was stopping to inspect the rows of wildflowers on the path, to chat up the farmer who spelled his name. He kept watching Sharma's retreating form until he could see nothing but the faint shape of a man crossing the road. It was then he realized that the city-bound train, the last of the day, had left without him. He sprinted into the station master's booth and phoned his house. It took several rings for Canute to answer. Hello? Oh, Canute, he said. You must send a car. You must get me. I'm at Phillipsburg. The connection was poor, but he could hear Canute saying, Babu, what is happening? What is wrong? There was no way to express how wounded the afternoon had left him. And he knew the odds of securing a car at this hour, so he yelled back into the phone, Don't wait for me, Canute. Make dinner and go to bed. He asked the station master if there were any hotels in the village. A room just till the morning, he said. The station master shrugged and pointed vaguely in the direction of the dirt road. There were no hotels, he soon discovered. Either he would sleep underneath the stars, or he would announce himself at Sharma's house to spend the night. He was certain he couldn't do the latter. What a loss to face that would be, but the former, with its cold and its unknown night animals, seemed nearly as terrifying. He paced the town's only road until he grew hungry. Then he headed in the direction of Sharma's house, following a field where fireflies alighted on piles of ash. He had no wish to be discovered, but in the waning daylight that would soon turn into uninterrupted darkness, he felt as anonymous as any of the mosquitoes making dinner at his feet. When he reached the entrance to Sharma's house, he could smell the evening's meal, lentil soup, rice softened with clarified butter. He could see the two of them together in the kitchen. Sharma was slicing cucumbers and Tripti was stirring the pot. The way Sharma's knife passed over the counter seemed like an act of magic. Such grace and precision. Soon he knew the lentils and rice to be combined, a pair of onions diced, ginger infused into the stew, the table set, the meal consumed. He watched, waiting for the first words to be spoken, but they were silent partners, unified by the rhythm of their hands. They moved into the dining room with their meal, and he crawled to the open kitchen window. Sharma had left his mother's necklace on the kitchen counter, next to the teak china atop the stains of all meals past. What he was seeing couldn't be dismissed. Sharma had treated his greatest gift as if it were nothing more than a kitchen ornament. Nikhil's hand snaked through the window to recover the heirloom, and he knocked over a steel pan in the process. Sharma rushed to the kitchen and began to yell, "Thief, stop!" as if it were a mantra. Nikhil scurried down the hill, the necklace secure in his grip. And when he paused at the mouth of the town's only road and turned back, he thought he saw Sharma's hands in the window making signs that reminded him of their first meeting. And in the darkness, those dark fingers had beckoned. Nikhil almost called back, but too much distance lay between them. Whatever he said now wouldn't be heard.
Exactly. But I looked up some scouting ones. A few of them are worthwhile. The top, seems like every character in this story is trying to achieve happiness by sacrificing. Even though it's Nigel who says like it's a small sacrifice for enormous happiness. You believe everybody in this story is making a sacrifice for happiness. And even though it's kind of a laugh line, the way it brings it up. Like Tripti is sacrificing, I guess, her role in the household to go to university. That's what she wants. And Sharma is kind of in between. But
He seemed happier walking home than being home.
right.
My thought was his time with Nikhil was his sacrifice for the enormous happiness of getting the house and the wife.
Mm-hmm. And I was curious, the person he was laughing with, was the person male or female?
Yeah.
It just said wearing something like the pants.
I was envisioning, under the white wig.
Working
Me
at a
too.
foundry,
Yeah.
a coworker
Yeah.
show.
Oh, see, the pants, the way they described the pants, it made me think of those, shoot, those leisure suit kind of pants from like the 70s. What did, break it down?
Nylon pants.
Yeah, how he
This
described
story
it.
happened in 1970.
Yeah, there was something in here that made me think we were in the 70s. I don't remember where.
It's those parachute pants.
It's where they're really odd pair of slacks or something.
Oh, atrocious nylon pants that were the fashion. Yeah, I was picturing like something, the high-waisted guys with the leisure pants that everybody wore back then.
I had, again, it was in India, I had, we went in 2015 there, and, you will see the men, everyone, and their pants and their colors you can see in the street.
The transvestite.
And the transit, when they cross the street, that's what I was picturing, when I read that, and I was walking with another man of interest.
But that's what I wondered
Yeah.
too, but they parted so quickly, you didn't know.
It struck me too that he went to his affair partner's house and then didn't like the way his wife talked to him. I was like, oh, so we're still patriarchy.
Very,
We're, we're still doing it. Like,
Yeah.
she's not showing the deference, you know what I mean? Like she's being rude. It's like, dude, why are you here?
Well,
So he's in the high class, presumably.
yes.
With the cash gift so he could buy the house.
And then, yeah, with money from the city, she's not any of those.
And the same thing where it's like, no, well, I'll pay for actual tutors to come help you.
Right.
Not, you don't go
Not from
local
here.
person. Yeah, it's-
Well, that's what those last two sentences are so telling. McKeel almost called back, but too much distance lay between them. Whatever he said now would be her.
Yeah.
Distance more than, how many feet between them?
I guess you realize at some point, I mean, but you realize now that Charlotte's not into you, whatever you got, you just, it's like, he was telling you his wife would carry the baby, she's got no plans right now of being pregnant.
Right, yeah.
And
He's not listening to what he wants. So he's the big man.
That's interesting that he says the country is moving along such that two men can have a baby. But he's so very misogynistic
right,
about the one. So you gotta wonder, like, which one is happening. Can like both be riding, on their way to experiencing that progression.
It's like, do you want, wants a bad word because no one wants to be marginalized, but are you marginalized or do you, when you can't leverage those same societal, privileges essentially? So it's like you're gay at a time, or, even current day, it's like it's not really socially accepted. It's, it's very complicated, but you'll still happily leverage your wealth, your place in society, being more of a sort of an urban elite, I guess. That's the bit of a stretch, but that idea. It's like you'll still leverage all that when it suits you, but then you're the victim when it suits you at the same time, and it's kind of like, it's not really how it works. Although, I guess it is actually exactly how it works.
Yeah,
It's exactly how it works.
but we run like 2 women for president now and still.
Yeah.
Misogyny still exists, like, and yeah, if you're a man, even if you have like gay behavior, that's more acceptable than being female. It's crazy.
Yeah. I didn't like McKeel the whole time. I didn't
Yeah,
like-
he's very presumptuous and needy and
Clueless.
yeah,
Very, very, very selfish, very just like, only if it's all about him.
So you got, I want our love to increase. I desire to have a child.
I.
Yeah.
Although my dearest Ferris boy is the only way I'm reading from now. That's getting it right.
All right, well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, well, something me before you guys came here, just thinking about doing another short story.
Yeah, I've got some ideas, I've got everything.
Well, we start taking proposals, I think in January. This is when I don't get a break because we finished one, fall, and we're almost done with winter now. And it's, and then this one will start.
Thanks, everybody.
So, Rachel,
I gotta tell you, I love your t-shirt.
Oh, thank you. Both my parents
Mr. Willie.
from Texas, yeah, I didn't have a choice.
If any of you want, we didn't have time to get to the Mark Twain rant story, but I have a copy.
Oh, sure.
And after you read it, I recommend seeing that.
Oh, you know what? I'll send a link out to the YouTube video. Yeah.
Thank you.
Suzanne, you probably already copied it, right?
I've already read it, yeah.
Yeah, I figured. It's a good one.
if you have a print copy, I'll take that.
Yeah, I was gonna end up recycling these stuff.
By clicking it in, I can't find the file, put it in. File, place.
It's really fun.
It is.
When I used to have my students read it without the I thought it was really funky to have them read it that way. But you'll discover that it needs the break. Maybe it is that.
That was little slides.
Playing music.
Yeah.
New, I'm seeing, pushing the limits.